Before we jump into this week's episode of the Major Pain Podcast, I will remind you that I am not a medical professional. Please do not take any medical action based off what you hear on this podcast without first consulting your doctor. I'll also say that if you are enjoying Major Pain, we would love your support to keep the show going. There are several great ways to do so. The first is our ongoing Patreon campaign. Through Patreon, you can subscribe with monthly financial contributions that directly support this show's creation. We have 3 tiers of support: the $2 per month supporter tier, $7 per month patron tier, and $25 per month producer tier. Each tier comes with different levels of recognition on the podcast itself and gifts when you sign up. Our $7 per month patrons will receive a gift of a Major Pain coaster, and our $25 per month producers receive a Major Pain tote bag, both gifts made by my mom. Everyone who signs up on Patreon will gain access to monthly bonus episodes with myself and my partner Andy, where we talk about what's going on in our lives, updates on our health, and the movies and TV and books we are currently enjoying. You can learn more about our Patreon campaign and sign up to support this podcast at patreon.com/majorpainpodcast. Extra special thank you to our Patreon producers supporting this show at the highest tier of $25 per month: Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Other great ways to support this podcast include clicking our affiliate links, which you can find in the show notes of this and every episode. That includes Rare Patient Voice, an amazing program where you can be paid for your time to participate in research studies and surveys. If you have a diagnosis of any kind or you are a caregiver, you qualify to participate in Rare Patient Voice. Sign up using our link, rarepatientvoice.com/majorpainpodcast. And if you participate in a research study or survey, you will earn an average of $120 per hour for your time. You can also support this show when you sign up for NeuroHealth. NeuroHealth is an online headache and neurology clinic where you can get the care you deserve without the wait. Head to neurohealth.co/majorpain to get a discount and support this podcast when you sign up. Or you can head to our Amazon shop, amazon.com/shop/majorpainpodcast. Our shop features products that I use to manage my chronic illness, and Major Pain will earn a commission on any purchases from this shop. Or you can start any Amazon shopping trip from our shop, go on to Amazon, purchase anything at all, and this podcast will still earn a commission. Follow Major Pain on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast, where you can leave a comment on any episode and interact with other listeners of our growing community. And of course, don't forget to leave Major Pain a positive rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and most major podcast platforms. This show is intended as a free resource for anyone going through chronic illness and disability, to build community around experiences often lived in isolation, to break down the layers of societal ableism, and to help you navigate for your own personal health equity, and also just have a lot of fun. Thank you for checking out the Major Pain Podcast. Let's get to today's episode.
How lucky it is just to get through a day without pain.
If you look at me, it doesn't appear that I have a disability.
A test that comes back abnormal, it's like, yes, we're onto something here.
Welcome to Major Pain. I'm your host, Jesse Mercury, and this week I'm joined by my guest, Angela. Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jesse.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. Let's get to know you a little bit. Why don't you tell us about yourself?
Well, I'm Angela. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm 31. It's just kind of me and my husband and my dog. But I grew up here, went to college at LSU. I work in HR remotely, and, I'm the oldest of 4. So I definitely had a big family experience my whole life. Yeah, I'm just really happy to be here.
Awesome. What are you nerdy for? What do you like to do when you're just hanging around?
So I grew up doing, I danced, I did baton twirling, I did color guard. So I did color guard in college at LSU. So that's something I do like to do in my spare time. I like to read. I'm a big reader. I also really like Star Wars. That's kind of my nerd thing.
Awesome.
Very much an introvert. So lots reading, TV, music, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love Star Wars and I love reading. I'm currently on book 15 of 16 of Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, my favorite book series that I'm rereading again because I love it so much. What's your favorite author? What sort of genres do you love?
I always have a hard time answering that question because I have favorites based on topic. I minored in classics and I took Latin for about 7 years. So I really like any historical fiction and, nonfiction. I like anything about Rome. I really like Stephen Saylor's books. which are he has like a series about this essentially a private investigator living in ancient Rome who kind of interacts with a bunch of real historical characters. Like he is fictional, but the people he interacts with are real. So I like that's a favorite of mine. I'm getting back into fantasy this year, so I'm just kind of going down the deep dive of a lot of those big series that I missed out on the last couple of years because I went into like a period where I only was really listening to audiobooks while I worked, and I can't listen to fantasy. I have to like physically read it with my eyes.
Yeah.
So I didn't read a bunch of the big stuff that's come out in like the last like decade, and now I'm trying to catch up on that. So, but yeah, I like a lot of stuff. It's hard to narrow down favorites, but
yeah. Well, I definitely recommend Robin Hobb if you like fantasy. She's my absolute favorite. I just feel like as someone who reads, her books are huge, and I just pour through them like so fast. I'll read like a 700-page book in a week. And then between Robin Hobb books, I'm thinking about Robin Hobb and missing Robin Hobb. She's just like, my reading obsession. And I feel like I'm a huge reader, but then when I'm reading other things, sometimes I will slow down quite a bit. And then I'll come back to Robin Hobb and just inhale, a 700-page book in a week. So she's so good, and it's so rereadable. Anyway, this is not a Robin Hobb podcast. Okay. Let's get into your story. Angela, what is your major pain?
Okay, so I have like a list of major pains, but I think my number one pain that gives me the most grief right now is definitely psoriatic arthritis. But I also have small fiber neuropathy.
Oh,
I have like Raynaud's. I have to like make a list because I forget because there's some things, but I'm somewhere on the hypermobility spectrum, but not enough to have EDS. So I kind of have that kind of going on too. A little bit of what some of my doctors think is probably a type of dysautonomia, but not POTS. So like there's a lot of weird stuff going on, but I also get trigeminal neuralgia. That what we think is trigeminal neuralgia. It's kind of weird. It comes and goes. But then I get migraines. I've got rosacea, seborrheic dermatitis, and psoriasis. So we've got like I have like a little printout wheel that I have at my house, and I will spin the wheel, and it's got like all the list of my stuff, and I'm just like, this is which one's gonna be my problem today? It's just kind of like a little humor, but but I think the ones that have given me the most grief, especially like the last few years, have been psoriatic arthritis, but small fiber neuropathy was like my inaugural illness. So I have a special place in my heart for that little monster. It like helped me get diagnosed with everything else. The first piece of the puzzle that kind of helped everything else to kind of come into play.
That's so surprising. And I have small fiber neuropathy, and it was the opposite for me. It was the last piece of the puzzle that we put in place. And it's really hard to diagnose too. So I'm very shocked by that. I have questions about that we'll get to in a minute. We haven't covered psoriatic arthritis in a while. I think the last time we talked about it was with Amy Stephanie Perez, which I think was at the beginning of season 2, if memory serves, somewhere around there. So it's been a long time. Can you remind us, what is psoriatic arthritis? What are the symptoms, and how does it affect you day to day?
Okay, so this is like my soapbox party topic. I love to talk about it. So I actually listened to that episode, and I think she had a more severe psoriasis. So I thought that this was a good kind of way to show like the two different sides of it. Because I have more severe on the arthritis end than I do have psoriasis, but the arthritis is worse. So psoriatic arthritis is an autoimmune inflammatory arthritis. It's for most people have never heard of it. The easiest way to explain it is it's a lot like RA, but different. So most people have heard of arthritis. So they're in sort of the same family. But PSA, essentially, it is, your immune system is out of whack. It's overactive. It's attacking your healthy tissues. So it's attacking your joints, your ligaments, your tendons. It impacts a lot of the soft tissue as well as your joints. So basically, the synovial fluid in your joints, that's what gets, and I'm not a doctor, but in my non-medical understanding of the scientific explanations, that is the part that's largely getting inflamed. So it's that synovial fluid that is like lining and coating your joints. It gets inflamed. It starts like pushing on your joints, pushing them out of place. But then it also, psoriatic arthritis can also impact your tendons and your ligaments and your soft tissue. So pretty much everywhere in your body where a tendon attaches to the bone, that's called an enthesis. So that can get inflamed too. So you can have joint pain, you can have like tendon pain that seems, on the surface, it seems to be a lot like a tendonitis type feeling, only it's 50 times worse. But then you can also get, you get the fatigue, you get the chronic fatigue, you get when you're starting to flare, you might get the feeling like you're coming down with the flu. So, you might feel warm and kind of fevery. But so that's like kind of on the arthritic side, but then you also have psoriasis too. The psoriasis bit of psoriatic arthritis, it can be regular, like plaque psoriasis. You can have psoriasis on your scalp. A lot of people don't realize there's a lot of forms of psoriasis. There's more than just like the plaque psoriasis. You can have nail psoriasis, which, might look like pitting on your nails, like dents in your nails, or your nails might get really thick or like start lifting off the nail bed. So your nails can kind of look funny. You can get, I think it's called guttate psoriasis, where it almost looks a little bit more like a shingles pimple type situation, where it's just that like circular red dots. Then there's inverse psoriasis, which kind of gets in your skin folds, right? Like, so in the crease of your elbow or your arm, your underarms or behind your knee or anywhere where there's a skin fold, you can get psoriasis there as well. And so out of the folks who have regular psoriasis, like who were just diagnosed with psoriasis first, about a third of those people, like 1 in 3 out of them, will go on to develop psoriatic arthritis on top of psoriasis.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the short version, I guess, of what PSA is.
Yeah. Wow. Great answer. I mean, you're obviously very knowledgeable in the way that someone can only be when they have the disease,
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like you can read about it all day long. You can study it. You can go to medical school. You can treat the disease as a practitioner for decades and still not understand it in the way that someone will when they have the disease. So, okay, that's a great definition. How about for you personally? How does this affect you personally? Where do you hurt and where do you have issues with psoriasis?
So where do I not hurt is probably the best question, is the better question. But so I actually have scalp psoriasis and I have scalp sebopsoriasis. So it's basically my scalp is like a mixture of psoriasis and seborrheic dermatitis. So I have both conditions. Then I do have inverse psoriasis kind of under my arms and like a couple other areas. And then I have nail psoriasis. And then I have like tiny little normal psoriasis plaques on my knees and on my elbows. But I didn't have psoriasis until about the time I got diagnosed. So I knew I had seborrheic dermatitis. I'd been diagnosed with that in grad school like 8-9 years ago, but they didn't catch that my scalp also had psoriasis. So we didn't know about it. So I had no idea when I got diagnosed. That was not something I was expecting at all because I had been told I didn't have psoriasis. So and then on the arthritis end, PSA can be kind of migratory, where I think you'll see like with folks with RA, a big difference between PSA and RA is RA tends to be bilateral, and it tends to be like a specific list of joints that it impacts, right? With folks with RA, you're going to see both of their knees are going to hurt, or maybe both of their wrists are going to hurt. Something else is like they are going to have more hand pain on like, and I know people who are listening can't see, but on like the knuckles that are like closer to your palm. Whereas PSA, it's going to be that top joint. It's called a dip joint. It's the closest like to the edge of your fingernail. So you're going to get like pain right up in there. I also present largely with enthesitis, which is like we talked about earlier, where the tendon attaches to the bone, to the bone. So that area gets inflamed. So for me, most of my pain is enthesitis. my ankles are the worst. Like my posterior tibial tendons, which are the ones that are kind of on the inside of your foot, kind of that run along your ankle. For me, those are my special pain spot that is always kind of there no matter what. But then you also a hallmark spot that I have now that I didn't have originally is your Achilles tendon will hurt. You'll get or like your plantar fascia on the bottom of your foot. So a lot of it, so you see how it's easy to diagnose it as like, oh, that's just tendonitis or an overuse injury because it's in those spots. I also get it in my wrists, which kind of can masquerade to some people as like a carpal tunnel type of thing. If it's in your wrist, if typing irritates it. And then I get it in my elbows too. But then I also get regular kind of joint pain. Like there's a spot in my shoulder where I get pretty regular joint pain. My knees get really stiff. They don't hurt so much as they're stiff. So stiffness is another thing that we get, and I think a lot of folks with arthritic conditions or rheumatology conditions get that kind of stiffness. So that's like a big thing for me. Another big thing that you can get is costochondritis, which is basically when you kind of feel like you're having a heart attack, but you're not having a heart attack. And then you can also get, like we said, like enthesitis can be pretty much anywhere in your body where the tendon attaches to the bone. You can get that in your rib cage too. So you can get like along your sternum, along like the edge of your rib cages. And then you can also get spots like, if you guys know what a bursa is, kind of like on your the tip of your elbow, like you have like those little, I don't know if they're fat pads exactly, like little fatty little tissues, but they're called bursas, and those can get like swollen and inflamed. So you'll get like if you just have like a little hot spot on your elbow or on your knee. So I kind of run the gamut of, I get pretty much all of the symptoms, but they don't all happen at one time. Right. If like the synovial fluid is acting up and I'm having like legitimate joint pain, let's say it's in my wrist, for example. If I'm getting like a flare up of that in my wrist, it'll feel like someone has taken out all of my bones and everything that's in there and have like replaced it with like hot glass.
Oof.
Yeah. So it's like, it'll come on like sudden, like I know there was one time I was in the kitchen doing something and it happened to my ankle and like, I just kind of had fall on the floor and like I was about to fall on the floor and catch myself because I couldn't, all of a sudden, like my ankle did that and I couldn't put any weight on it. And I was like in the middle of walking and I was like, oh, we're going down. So it's pretty painful, but it's actually it's a disease that like people don't really know about. And I think that's because it gets kind of overshadowed by some of its more well-known cousins in the arthritis community. So most people know about osteoarthritis or they know about RA, but they don't really know about PSA. And most people don't even really know that psoriasis is like an autoimmune disease to begin with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting disease because it is both visible and invisible. And this is a topic that we talk about a lot on this podcast, living with invisible illness and the idea that like, oh, you don't look like you're in pain, so therefore you probably aren't, like other people assuming that when in fact you are in a lot of pain, but we all learn how to mask because we have to get through the day. And I've lived on both sides of that as well, having both a visible and an invisible illness. My illness has sort of oscillated between the two, depending on whether or not I'm using a mobility aid or a wheelchair. I mean, that is a mobility aid, a cane or a wheelchair. If I'm having a really bad flare up, the way that I move through the world is so different than on a day where I'm not having a flare up and I seem completely normal. The way that the world interacts with you based off of how you're feeling is such a huge part of living with chronic illness. So to have a chronic illness that literally is both, it has one facet, one leg in both. It's like when I was a kid and I'd go to a friend's house and they had a pool and a spa, and they're like connected. I'd love to have one leg in the spa and one leg in the pool. I just thought that was like an interesting sensation to be hot on one side and cold on the other. But that's kind of what it is to have an invisible and a visible illness at the same time. You're living in these two worlds at the same time. You have legs and, two different bodies of water at once. And I'd love to hear what that's like from you, to have something that people often probably underestimate because they don't know anything about it and they can't see it. And then to have something else where, this is something we talked about with Amy a lot, the visible aspect of psoriasis and moving through the world in a world where people are judgy and afraid and, this is not contagious, but I remember very vividly her talking about people assuming that it was, and the challenge that can cause. So what's that been like for you to straddle those two worlds?
So I think I have probably an easier time with that because my psoriasis tends to be hidden in spots that people can't see, right? So like my scalp,
Yeah.
now my scalp is a hot mess. Like every time I see my rheumatologist and my dermatologist, they're like, they assess, I think they assess the stats of everything else based on how bad my scalp is. They're like, so how's the scalp? And I'm like, it's never better. It's always the same. Like it's always like flary and gross, but like, because like, I mean, and I also have thick curly hair. So, and like, as if you have scalp psoriasis or seborrheic dermatitis or any type of eczema, you know that it's like flaky and it kind of gets dandruffy. Because I have thick curly hair, it does not fall out of my hair and like onto my clothes in the way that it would if I had probably like straight hair or finer hair. So on one hand, it's like easier to hide it. And not that I'm trying to hide it. It just is, it's kind of hidden in there, kind of like not like a rat's nest, but kind of like a rat's nest. But like, I mean, I do brush my hair sometimes. I mean, curly hair, people know. But then it's, on the spots on my knees, the spots on my elbows, they're, you can't really see them from far away. You have to be like in my personal bubble to really see them. And then with inverse psoriasis and nail psoriasis, like, no one's looking under my armpit to see my inverse psoriasis, but now the one thing that, you really can see is like, my fingernails are fine, but my toenails are super affected by it. So wearing like open-toed shoes and sandals and stuff like that has been kind of challenging just because like to everyone else, like nail psoriasis can look like it's like a fungal infection. And people are like, oh my gosh, your foot's infected. And I'm like, I promise you, it's literally not. It's just psoriasis. But so that's been kind of a more challenging thing for me. I know it's for the folks who have like the big plaque psoriasis, like on their arms and on their legs. That's really painful. Now, I do know that like, inverse psoriasis is very itchy, right? So it might not look like plaquey, but it's so itchy and it's in all your sensitive spots. Cause like, under your arm, in the crease of your elbow, those are like sensitive skin areas in general. So it's like, it gets itchy. I know it's psoriasis. It's like Psoriasis Action Month, I think, right now in August, which is fitting because I've actually started developing new psoriasis spots like in my ears and like on the side of my ear and kind of going into my ear and then like kind of on my stomach, like near my belly button. And like I accidentally pulled a plaque off and it hurt. And I was like, oh, that's psoriasis. So like, I find that for me, I've been blessed that the psoriasis part isn't as painful and isn't as noticeable. But the other thing too is like, psoriasis is basically like your immune system is producing way too much skin cells. And it's like, it does not need to be replenishing skin cells at that rate, but it is because your immune system is on overdrive. It's just doing it anyway, which is why you end up with like all of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's, a really good reminder of why it's so important to talk to more than one person with each disease. It's so easy when you just have talked to one person to think, oh, I know what psoriasis is. And I know what it's like from talking to Amy, but talking to you, it's so different. It's same disease, completely different presentation, and everyone's journey with chronic illness is unique and individual and just as valid as everyone else's. And to fully understand a disease, not only do you have to live with it, like we talked about before, but you also have to know what other people live with, which is why it's so complicated to navigate the medical system.
Yeah, for sure. And like with PSA, because it can present so differently from person to person, that's why it's so hard to get diagnosed. And that's another reason why like rheumatologists, like even a lot of rheumatologists don't really catch it, in their patients at first. And the other thing that people don't really realize is you can develop the arthritis and develop the psoriasis later.
Yeah.
And most people think it's not going to be psoriatic arthritis if the psoriasis doesn't come first. But for me, the arthritis symptoms showed up pretty long before the psoriasis, So in some people, I know I'm in a group for PSA folks, and some of those folks, they might have one patch of psoriasis, like on their whole body, or they, and they might have had the arthritis for 10 years before it even showed up. So we all present so differently. Another thing is like, some of us get like swollen joints and some of us don't. Like I get very, very slight swelling on my hands occasionally, but it's so slight that I couldn't even notice it. My rheumatologist noticed it, but I didn't even notice it. And I'm, looking at my hands all day, every day.
Yeah.
So it's a very sneaky little thing. Like it tries to elude treatment. It tries to elude diagnosis. But I remember listening to that other episode, and she had such a different experience with psoriasis than I did. And I was like, I'm like learning so much from her, because I, at least in the way that my condition manifests now, my psoriasis is small potatoes compared to the arthritis bit. But it's also very possible that one day that could switch, and the psoriasis could be the more challenging part for me. So, I think I love hearing other people's stories about it, just because it's so different from person to person.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about different illnesses every week on this show, but you could have a whole podcast just about psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis. You could talk to different people about one disease every week and still be full of interesting, fascinating stories and still learn every week. Again, it just speaks to the complicated tapestry that is woven from living with a chronic illness, and how that's going to be different for every single person. You'd mentioned, treatment and how difficult it can be to treat, which I really want to circle back to later. Don't let me forget that. But I'm dying to hear about your small fiber neuropathy experience.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, I have this disease, and I know how hard it is to get diagnosed. But it sounds like that was the beginning of your journey. When did your journey start?
So I was 25, or I was about to turn 25, or maybe I was 25. My birthday's in March, and I'm not a math girl, so I think I was around 25 then, and I was at the gym. At the time, I was a runner, but it was an off day for me, so I wasn't running, and I was just doing like weight machines. All of a sudden, like, it was really exhausting. And so I stood up and I was like, I feel kind of weird, but like, not like I popped anything or pulled anything. And then I went to go, I was like, let me just try to shake it off. So I tried to go walk for a few minutes. All of a sudden, my legs just felt like they were on fire. And it was just like nerve pain shooting through the whole entire lower half of my body. I had never had bad experiences with doctor. My pediatrician was amazing. And I was a healthy kid. Like, other than being like a little suspiciously hypermobile and like never breaking a bone, but like twisting ankles here and there that should have probably broken, but they didn't, because I had like, more laxity in my joints. I had been very healthy, other than like normal kid stuff. And so, I didn't go to the doctor. I like tried to put off going to the doctor, but then like for like 2 or 3 days, I was just in like severe, like 11 out of 10 nerve pain through my legs. I like didn't really have adult doctors at the time, because I had been healthy. Like, I'd only really gone to the ENT occasionally. Like, I hadn't been to like an annual checkup in years. So finally I was like, okay, I have to go to the doctor. And so we thought at first it was an injury, which it's very possible that it may have been an injury that triggered it, along with something else. We really don't know, because at the time my doctor was not a great doctor. He would take my husband's stuff seriously and then like roll his eyes at me. But I had never had a doctor, this is obviously a place of privilege. I had never had a doctor that I didn't feel like I could trust, because our pediatrician had been great and we saw him up through like college. So, and my ENT had been great. So like, I'd never had a bad experience with the doctor. And he didn't do any imaging. He looked at me and he said, oh, it hurts there. Like, it was in my legs. It was in my legs, but it wasn't in the spot where it'd be sciatica. But it also wasn't, he didn't do anything to investigate if it was like a pinched nerve or a disc or anything. He sent me to physical therapy and just said that I had torn my adductor muscle, which I clearly, I did. I spent like a year in PT, never got better. They said, oh, well, you're hypermobile, so you're never going to get better because you're hypermobile. And I was like, that makes zero sense. Like, if this is an injury, I should heal from this. So I kind of, I continued having like nerve pain on and off in all parts of my legs. And then I started having like weird sensations where, like, I don't know if you get this with your SFN, but I get the feeling that somebody's like flicking water on my legs,
Mm.
but there's not. So,
Yeah.
and I know that small fiber can present differently from person to person too, just like PSA. So, at the time I was working under the assumption that I was just having like an injury that wasn't getting better. And so it was really bad for like the first 8 months, first year. And then it kind of started to calm down a little bit and would just like wax and wane where it would flare really bad. Like it would be like, just like being shocked all the time,
Mm.
but I could walk, but like I couldn't really go upstairs. Like I couldn't, which at the time I lived in an apartment and I had stairs that had to get up to my apartment. So that was difficult. But like, they were just, my doctor, like he just kept saying I needed physical therapy. He didn't like ever do any imaging. He didn't send me to an orthopedic doctor. And at the time, like I didn't know better than to ask for those things. Cause I just said, oh, he's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about. And so that went on for all of 2019. And then in 2020, like by 2020, I was like, January 2020, I was like, I've had enough. I need to, like, this is not getting better. This is ridiculous. So I switched doctors, kind of tried to figure out the process of that. She had me do like an MRI in my back. She was like, well, your back looks fine. So we're going to send you back to PT. So I did like so many rounds of PT and it just like never got better. They were like convinced at that point that it had never been an adductor tear, but it was something wrong with my back. Everything they were trying wasn't really working. I was doing like hours of physical therapy a day. It started getting where I would have periods of time where it would chill out. It would just be like nerve pain up in my legs. And then I started, I don't really regulate my body temperature very well. So I got that. I started getting stuff like that as well. And it was just kind of like weird neurological symptoms everywhere. But then once I kind of learned to kind of work around it, which is not always possible, but for me, after the initial like 8 to 9 months of pain, I kind of learned what could I push through and what I couldn't. So I just kind of, I was dealing with it. I just called it mystery nerve pain for like a long time. And I didn't actually end up getting a real diagnosis for it up until the summer, like July of 2022. So I went from 2019 to like July 2022, which in the grand scheme of things is not a super long time to be undiagnosed. It's only about like three and a half years. But and then I'd been to a neurologist. I'd been to like 2 neurologists by then. I had seen sports med. I'd had EMGs. I had like a bunch of stuff, and they still were like, we don't, my sports med doctor thought I had MS, and I was like, but it's just in my legs. Everywhere else is fine. Yeah. And then finally, when I started having more symptoms, when the psoriatic arthritis symptoms started happening too, I was like, finally, I thought it was all the same condition. And I was like, sure. I have to try to get this diagnosed. So I had talked to my rheumatologist, or my new neurologist at the time. It was my second neurologist. And I was like, I don't know what the deal is, but like, I feel like I'm getting worse. I know we talked in the past about how I didn't really want to pursue more testing because it was kind of it was at a manageable level for me at that point. But then when everything else started happening, I was kind of like, oh, well, this isn't getting not manageable anymore. And so he talked to me for a little bit. He did that thing where, I don't know if you had this, but they kind of poke around on you with a toothpick and see like if you sense the things. And the thing that I said that made him think of small fiber neuropathy was, I told him, I was like, well, you just tap me with the toothpick, I will feel that sensation for like at least the rest of the day, if not longer than that. Another thing I get with my small fiber is I feel sensations for a lot longer than you should.
Yeah.
And he sat back in his chair and he looked at me and he said, I think I know what this is. Not that we want to thank COVID for anything, but I think COVID and having like, because a lot of folks are getting small fiber after COVID, as part of their long COVID. And, I think a lot of neurologists didn't know what it was. So by the time when I was looking for, when I was initially looking for a diagnosis, no one would have known what small fiber neuropathy was. Like even a lot of neurologists didn't. But then by the time I was getting diagnosed, that was 2022. And my neurologist had heard of it. Not only had he heard of it, he knew how to test for it, which was like miraculous. And he was like, I think I know what you have. I'm pretty sure you have small fiber neuropathy because, we were dealing with the temperature regulation problems, like the pain, the weird sensations. And then so he was like, well, I'm going to have to put you through another EMG before they'll approve the punch biopsy. So we did the EMG. It was normal. And as like I already had like at least one of them before. And he was like,
they're so painful.
They are, but I'm actually like, my neuropathy was so much worse that I was like unfazed. So I was like sitting on the table and they're, shocking you. And my doctor, he looked at me and he's like, you were remarkably chill about this. Most of my patients are like trying to jump off the table and like, you're just like calmly sitting there and I'm like shocking the crap out of you. And I was like, doc, this isn't even nearly as bad as like how bad the neuropathy was when it first started. So like now, so then he did the punch biopsy. It went off to like Therapath lab, I think is where mine went. And it came, but I only did 2 punches. I did, because I don't have really symptoms in my arms. We did like the one kind of at the top of your leg and then in your ankle. So we did those and they came back like a month later and then it's like, he was like, oh, you have small fiber neuropathy. And I was like, finally an answer for something. Yeah. But then that also did not explain a lot of my other symptoms either. So he was like, okay, well, you have small fiber, but, and my B12 was very low too. Like I'm chronic. I'm like mostly vegetarian. So like my B12 is like chronically low. And so he put me on a supplement for B12 because I know for some folks that can be a cause of their small fiber. And then for other people, it can be like autoimmune things and other things. So once we got that diagnosed, he was on the hunt to figure out what was the cause of mine. And so he had me start the B12. He's like, it could just be that, but also your other symptoms are kind of wacky. So he was like, I think you need to see rheumatology. So he sent me to a rheumatologist. The rheumatologist basically said I was fine and to get out.
Oh my God, no.
That was a whole, I'll get into that. That was a whole story. But basically he didn't even run like actual autoimmune blood work panels. He ran like 3 inflammation blood work markers. And I don't remember what they were, but like I don't think he even ran like ANA or anything like that. Like he did like not even the bare minimum. That was like the worst appointment I've ever had in my life. He had all my records, but he had all my records from my doctor who kept misdiagnosing me previously, like my first primary care doctor. Yeah. And then it had all kinds of weird notes in there. And then like stuff from my old physical therapist who they never really listened to me. Like I was describing nerve pain to them for like over a year and like they didn't really know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I was like, no, this isn't an adductor tear. Like, even if it was, it would have been healed after like 8 months of physical therapy. Like, it would have healed. Yeah. Right? Like, that's ridiculous. And then they were like, oh, no, it's your back. Oh, it's you. So my records were totally like wacky. And because, at the time, my insurance required you to get PT visits approved. So you had to submit paperwork to allege why I needed more visits because they would only approve like 3 visits at a time. So you had to keep going through the cycle. So they were putting whatever they thought would get the visits approved. So my records, it said I had hip pain when I had like never had hip pain. And then there were like records from a year that I wasn't even being treated by anyone in that clinic. And I was like,
weird.
I don't know where they got some of this stuff. I think it was when my newer primary care doctor had to basically forcefully request that they send all my records over to her because they were, my old providers were trying to withhold them. And so they sent everything. It was like malicious compliance. They sent like everything. The physical therapist office sent everything, even though they didn't want to. And it was like, so when the rheumatologist, he was looking through all this, he's interrogating me about stuff. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, I wasn't even a patient at either of those places that year, and nor did I have hip pain. So I don't know what you're talking about. And like, he looked at my I wasn't officially diagnosed with psoriasis at the time, but like I had it. It was like very obvious to me now that I had it on my scalp. I had it on my nails. He looked at me. He said, "What's on your scalp?" And I said, "Well, as far as I know, it's seborrheic dermatitis." And he looked at me and he was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Well, it's kind of like psoriasis and eczema." And then he started yelling at me and he was like, "You don't have psoriasis. You don't have psoriasis," while he's like looking at evidence of my psoriasis.
Oh my God.
And so he started yelling at me. And then he made me get on the table. He poked around a couple of my joints. At like that point, like they had already yelled at me to come in, or like the nurse had called and like yelled at me over the phone because they wanted to, I was their last patient. They wanted to go home early that day and they wanted me to come in like 3 hours ahead of time. So they called me and she's like, "Why aren't you here yet?" And I'm like, "My appointment's not for like 3 hours." She's like, "Well, we want to leave. You need to come in early." And I was like, so we started off on the wrong foot.
Wow.
And so, he gets me off the table. He's like poking and prodding. With psoriatic arthritis, you don't always have swollen joints. Like if he had been touching on my tendons, we would have elicited like a big pain response. But he's like poking at my knee or like or the joints where RA typically it impacts. So he was like, I say this in quotes, like I would never say this. This is how he phrased it. He said, "Nothing's deformed," like referring to my joints, "and you don't have psoriasis, so don't come back unless you develop psoriasis."
Wow.
I will say he was a very elderly doctor. And like when they had sent me the referral to rheumatology, it just went to the whole department and the scheduler had just put me with the doctor who was open first. And I have learned that if the doctor has a lot of openings, they are probably not good. Probably don't. If you can get into a rheumatologist soon and it's not like a sudden cancellation, they're probably not a rheumatologist people want to see for a reason. So
No.
yeah, so he made me leave. It was like storming that day too. It was like horrible weather, and I go back to my neurologist. He's like, he only ran like the 2 blood works or the 3 little tests. He's like, what do you mean? And they're in the same clinic, just at different departments. And he was like, "What do you mean you didn't run anything else?" And I was like, he told me to get out because I was too young to have a problem and I didn't have any deformed joints, to his opinion. So like, and I guess for him, he was, he only wants to treat, maybe it's an old school thing where he only wanted to treat you if you were showing like bone changes, like obvious bone changes. Mm-hmm. So I guess he was like, "Well, you're fine. Nothing's like, your hands aren't crooked yet, so I'm not doing anything for you." But he basically said I was fine and I wasn't. So the neurologist was like, "I can put the orders in for the blood work. I'm just going to do it myself." So he put it was like 15 vials of blood.
Wow.
Worth of, like the ANA panels, the Sjogren's panels, the like literally the RA panels, like everything you could think of, he ran. And it took like weeks. And like we have an on-site lab at the big clinic, and he they can do a lot of it there, but then some of it has to get sent out to like LabCorp or wherever. So it took weeks for everything to come back, and it all came back normal. And he was just like flabbergasted. He was like, "The small fiber neuropathy does not explain the other half of your symptoms." He's like, "I know you've got something. I just don't know what it is." And but at that point, like rheumatology had basically rejected me. And at the clinic, we don't have a lot of rheumatologists in Louisiana. We are last in the nation on a lot of lists for a lot of reasons.
Wow.
And like, because like a lot of bigger metro cities are going to have like the teaching hospitals and whatever.
Right.
We have like health school, like med schools here in New Orleans and in Shreveport, but like we don't have a lot of rheumatologists. Most people in like southern Louisiana area, you're going to Baton Rouge, which is where I live, or you're going to New Orleans because those are where the rheumatologists are, but there are not very many of them. So, you're looking at like a several month wait at the earliest, so at that point I had been seen by rheumatology. They dismissed me. I think they have a rule in their department at our clinic where you have to get dismissed as a patient by one. You can't just switch rheumatologists. Like there has to be something on and then because they have so few of them that they don't want you to be a patient that's just trained to like doctor hop. if you don't like what they're saying, which I think is kind of demeaning to patients. But
Yeah.
like, because especially like I got dismissed by this dude, but then like, that kind of blocked me from seeing another one for a while. So, he would have, even though he told me to get out, we were afraid that they would give me grief if I called and was like requested to be like get an appointment with another one without like some time passing and some more referrals. When all that blood work came back normal, my neurologist and I were like, okay, well, I guess we'll just kind of hang out and see what happens and then try again later. Maybe it'll pop up on the blood work, because he was trying to function as my rheumatologist in that moment too, because he's great. He was like trying to get me some answers. He's like, I don't know what's happening to you.
That's amazing. I mean, that's unheard of, but I love that. This doctor's just like, yeah, this specialist is terrible, so I'm just going to pretend I'm a rheumatologist and order the tests anyway.
So that is like the bulk of my small fiber saga. Now there were a lot of up and downs. I had like 4 different physical therapists. I had 2 primary care doctors, 2 neurologists. Like it took a while to get there. And then I also had like my sports med doctor who was also great, who did my initial EMGs and he like ran like an ultrasound on my legs to look at my blood vessels. Like he was like adamant that there was something going on. He was like, I just don't know what it is. So I had like several doctors who believed me and several who didn't. So I kind of got like a mixture of that. So I was a runner. And so I was running with nerve pain, which do not be me, listeners. Do not be me. That's not. But like I was the type of, and like I'm not like a perfectionist type A person, but as the oldest daughter and like having been in school environments and stuff all my life where it was a very no excuses mentality of you just have to push through. You're being lazy. You have to push through. And my parents are not like that. So like disclaimer, mom and dad, if you're listening, they're not like that. But like my school environments were like that. And like my extracurricular activities were like that. So it was very much of you're obligated to fulfill all your responsibilities. It doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you've got like a broken leg. Like you have to do it all. So like that was the kind of the type of mindset I had of like, I am in severe pain and I just have to push through. And, when it initially happened, like I couldn't run. Like I didn't run for like 9 months because I was feeling like somebody was tasing me with every step I took. So it was like, I was like, I don't know how to manage this. I don't know, I don't know what it's going to do. I don't know if like something's going to tear. Like, I don't know if I'm going to go down and I'm going to like lose feeling in my leg. Like, I just didn't know what was going on. So like, but once I kind of got it a little bit more subdued, which I cannot take credit for that. I think that was just time, honestly. And it just kind of changing how it wanted to present slightly. But after that, like all of 2020, all of 2021, I would be out there at 4 a.m, running 10 miles with nerve pain, with a migraine. It didn't matter if it was raining. If we had a heat advisory that day, I was like getting up even earlier. I was like, I'm going to beat heat. Like when I tell you, I was like a little monster to myself. I was, right? And do not be me. Like that was like such a lack of grace for myself that I was like, I just have to push through because nobody will accept me if I'm not achieving these things I'm supposed to achieve. Mid 2020, I was barely holding it together. I was like desperate to do the other things that I wanted to do, right? So I was like, I'm going to run again. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to let anything stop me. And like, I think that kind of mentality ended up hurting me later down the line when the psoriatic arthritis started really kind of onsetting. So because I was like, I pushed through with my neuropathy, I can do it again. I can do it again. I pushed through with the migraines, I can do it again. I pushed through with the neuralgia, I can do it again. And like, but I shouldn't have been doing that to myself. Like, why was I doing that to myself? Yeah. But I think the other thing is too, is like your whole life, if your whole life people have needed you to be a specific type of person, and they're kind of, the message you're receiving from people is you need to play this role in my life and I need you to achieve these things. And if you don't do that, there's nothing for you outside of that. And, so that with a lot of the relationships I had in my life at the time, it was like, if I wasn't able to be responsible, like the parent of the group type of thing, then, or the one who was achieving this or picking up the slack for everyone, if I wasn't able to do that, no one had any time for me. Or like they were like, oh well, you really let us down, Angela, or Angela, why didn't you pick up that slack? So like I was feeling a lot of pressure on myself like at work and with friends and stuff to like hide the pain and to continue pushing through because it made other people uncomfortable when I needed support and help. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's totally like one of those ways in which societal ableism can become internal, and we all feel this expectation to present the healthiest, most productive version of ourselves and to be the version of ourselves that we think that other people want us to be. When that isn't working with the needs of your body, those things can be at odds in very intense ways that can really lead to a horrible burnout.
Yeah. After, I had been doing that for so many years through all of my earlier health challenges, like most people had no idea that I was dealing with like the nerve pain. Like unless you saw me every day with the friends that I had at the time, it was like I was always like the mom of the group, not because that's a role I want to play, but when you are like an eldest child and you kind of end up being the third parent to your siblings, right? So you give off that energy of like, I'm a responsible eldest child. And then when people pick up that aura from you, then they want you to replicate that role in every other group you're in. Mm-hmm. So at least that's been my experience. So my friends were like, the expectation was I would support everyone, but then I wouldn't need support myself because I had it all together and I would do everything. So it was, and I had a very hard time. I have to own it. I had a hard time asking for help because I didn't really feel like I was allowed to. And so like, my friends would be like, let's go do X. And I like physically could not do it at the time because it would have stairs or whatever. And I would have to say, okay, well, I'm having a really hard time doing that, because I've been in physical therapy, but like I didn't have a condition to tell them. And it would just be like, they'd be like, what do you mean? What do you mean you can't do that? And it would be, and I would be like, well, could we do X, Y, Z instead? And it would be like, but why? And I'd be like, because I just told you I physically couldn't do it. It was almost like they wanted me, like, I remember a few situations where it's almost like they wanted me to like embarrass myself having to like put out all of the limitations, like out there, like have to go through the list with them. And like, I don't know if that was what they intended to do, but that's what it felt like to me. And like, and it's not embarrassing to say you need help, right? But at the time it was almost done like in a way where it was like meant to make me feel like I was not measuring up to what was going on. And that was only, that was just when I was only working with the small fiber. Like that was before all the other stuff even set. So like I had basically, I tried to hide everything as much as I could when I wasn't home. Like I tried to be as like able-bodied presenting as possible. I tried to never ask for help and like all those things, because when I had started to try to, I got like rebuffed like heavily.
When did you finally get diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis?
So I actually got diagnosed last year, so in 2023. But I probably had the early symptoms like starting in 2019 when I had the small fiber start. Like, because there was a time in the fall of 2019 where my ankles locked up. They just got really stiff and they locked up for like a month. And like they weren't exactly painful, but they got really stiff. And then my physical therapist at the time didn't really know what that was about. They just blamed it on my back, which if to them at that point everything was my back. And I'm like, I never actually had a back problem. But like, so they were like, oh, it's probably that. I ended up with a podiatrist who gave me like orthopedic inserts, and that sort of helped. So we were like, okay. And then the stiffness went away. I had roughly like 2020 and 2021. I did okay. Didn't really have anything like that happen. And then at the end of 2021, I started having other, like the PSA really started onsetting like big time. Like I had like the weird nails for, since 20, like that started in like 2020, but then at the end of 2021, I started getting enthesitis flares in my feet and in my ankles. And, that kind of but it was on and off, right? Like it would happen for like a week and then go away. That kind of continued all throughout 2022 where, but it was largely like in my feet and my ankles. Like I would be running and it wouldn't, like sometimes it would happen while I was running. Sometimes it wouldn't happen while I was running. My sports med doctor at the time was like baffled because he was like, it's not acting like tendinitis. And it doesn't seem to be like triggered by activity based on what you're describing. So I don't know what this is. But, so it kind of was on and off. But I mean, I was still able to run. Like, I mean, it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't super, super painful. And then as things kind of like spiraled throughout the year, like by April of 2022, I started having enthesitis in my hip. But I didn't know what it was. Like, I thought I had broken something, and a lot of what's runners, a lot of the time you start having pain. And the first thing you think of, if it's not like a muscle pain, you think you have stress fracture. So like, I thought I had a stress fracture in my hip. So I went to on a Sunday, I went to urgent care and was like, my hip really hurts. And I ran like 10 miles yesterday. Can you like just make sure it's not fresh? And they were like, it's fine, but maybe you have something else. And so, it was kind of just weird stuff on and on. I had like an elbow burst to swell up out of nowhere that I couldn't put weight on my elbow. And then I had like a lymph node in like my jaw, like where your jaw connects to your neck. It swelled up really bad, but I hadn't been sick. Like at that point, like I had never had COVID at that point. I was working from home largely. So like, and we were very like COVID conscious at my house. So like we hadn't had it yet. And so, they were like, well, are you sick? No, they ultrasounded it. They were like, well, we don't know why it's swollen. So, and then it just kind of through the summer, more and more things, I was having the enthesitis flares. I didn't know what they were, but that's what it was. I was having that in my feet and my ankles on and off. It started getting more frequent. Then I got the hip pain. Then I got the lymph node. Then I got like the swollen bursa on my elbow. And then like later that summer, I started getting really bad wrist pain that, they thought was like a cyst. They were like, well, there might be a cyst, a ganglion cyst in your wrist. And, and it was just kind of like one thing after another. And then in the middle of that, that's kind of when I picked back up of, I need to figure out, I need to get that nerve pain diagnosed because it might be the answer to all of this. So in the middle of that, I got that diagnosis, but then things kept progressing. So like, I started getting like a pain in my shoulder, and it was just like, they never correlated to like injuries. I was like driving myself like crazy because I was like, I felt like my body was like gaslighting me because it was like, there was always something different. It was moving around. They couldn't ever find anything on the tests. It just kind of kept getting worse and worse and worse until, November of 2022. My last run was November 2nd, of 2022. I went and I ran. And then at the end, my enthesitis was flaring so bad. And then like, I couldn't walk after that. So like I tried to walk the next day and was like in excruciating pain. Like I tried to go for a walk and it was just like, they put me back in PT. And, my physical therapist, my current physical therapist, who's great, she looked after like a few weeks of like, I was going to her. And every time she saw me, I had like less and less function every time she saw me. And she had already treated me through the past year while I was dealing with my neuropathy. So she already knew that I was kind of like a little weird patient who had like weird stuff going on. And, but then she was like, Angela, this is not normal. She's like, you're having what looks like tendinitis in multiple joints at the same time. You have not done anything to cause this. Like, she's like, you need to get back into rheumatology. And so she and my neurologist at that point, they kind of tag teamed a referral back to insist that I get back into a rheumatologist. And so, but then I had to wait like 4 months to get a rheumatologist. But like, that was really the last time, like early November, it was the last time I was able to like run or walk. And so, and it just got so bad but I had been trying to power through it all year because everybody had told me that it was fine. They're like, oh, well, there's nothing wrong. We don't see anything on the tests. You're fine. You don't have psoriasis. You're fine. And I thought that I was the problem. Anytime something would hurt, I was like, okay, well, what physical therapy can I do for it? Like, I've been in physical therapy on and off for like the past 5 years. So like, I'm a physical therapy pro. And like, at the time I was running, I was walking, I was in PT, I was doing Pilates once a week. I was going to a strength training class. I was convinced that it was because I was not doing enough.
Wow.
And I think that's like a message to every eldest child who has that personality like me, where you insist you have to like try to power through because you feel like you have to. Like, I was convinced that it was me. So I was like, I'm not doing enough. I need to change my diet. I need to reduce my mileage for running. So like, I need to rest for a week and then try again. Like, I did everything because the message I was getting was, we're not seeing anything on the tests. You're just not doing enough. And like, that was just out of control. Like, honestly, like, I was like running myself into the ground, trying to do everything. Like, because they're like, oh, your knee hurts, you need physical therapy. Your elbow hurts, oh, do more physical therapy. I was like doing like 3 hours of physical therapy a day my house, in addition to trying to run and trying to do Pilates and strength training. Like, because I was just starting to feel panicked all the time. I was like, I'm in so much pain. Resting doesn't help, which I think that's a thing that they don't really tell you with chronic conditions. A lot of the time, if you're having pain, you can go rest, but it's not going to help the way that it would help like an orthopedic injury, right? Like, orthopedic injury, you're going to rest while it's an acute phase. Then you're going to go do physical therapy. You're going to strengthen it. It's going to be better. Or you're going to get a surgery and then do physical therapy and it's going to be better. But like, for me, it did not matter how much I rested. It didn't get the problem. So, I was like, okay, well, if it's not an orthopedic injury, then I should be able to power through this. And, so I just was running myself into the ground, trying to take on more and more and more, changing diets, doing whatever I could do because, and then I also like in the process, I like suddenly gained like 15 pounds in like a month out of nowhere. But nobody could explain it. And like, I was like, well, if anything, I probably should have been losing weight with the amount of like heavy duty exercise I was doing. Like, that was not healthy for anyone, but it was always, oh, well, this hurts, you need to do more for it. So, but then I didn't know what was helping and what wasn't helping. So I didn't feel like I could drop anything I was already doing. Cause like, you don't know what's helping. So like, you don't
so
feel
you're just like trapped.
So then, so I started feeling trapped. And then like, I was noticing running wise, I was getting so fatigued, like not even normal fatigue, but it was almost like my pace was horrible. Like, I started getting so slow. Like, I felt like I was exerting so much effort. It was like almost running through like a humid haze all the time. And I was like, why is this so much harder than it used to be? And I was trying so hard and trying to be so strong. And it was just like, wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, why am I working so hard and nothing is working? So then finally, they finally put me back on the wait list for rheumatology. I ended up getting COVID for the first time that December. And that actually, like, I had like a very hard time with COVID. I was like sick for like a month, like actively testing positive for like over a month.
Yeah.
They thought at one point they were like worried I was going to have a blood clot because I started having like severe chest pain, but I wasn't coughing. And they didn't understand. They're like, well, you don't have pneumonia, but you're not coughing at all. So like my primary care doctor was like constantly having me tested, like doing EKGs, and like she had me do like a CT of my chest because they were like, I don't understand. You're in like severe chest pain, but you're not coughing and there's no fluid in your lungs. Like, they couldn't figure it out. Basically, what we figured out happened later is COVID kind of put its foot on the accelerator and made the psoriatic arthritis worse, but I didn't know what I was dealing with. I had never experienced the chest pain. Largely the pain was in my ankles and my feet, but it was occasionally, it was like popping around into different areas. But when I got COVID, it like spread widely all at the same time. And so, but I still had to wait another like month or two until I saw the rheumatologist. And I went into the second rheumatologist and I was like anxious, sweating because I thought he was going to tell me that I was like out of my mind. And so I sat in there, I waited like 2 hours to see him because rheumatology is always hours behind. And he came in, he talked to me for a few minutes, for like an hour, really. He spent a lot of time with me. He looked at me and he said, I think you have two things going on. He's like, one, you're hypermobile. And so a lot of those like weird dysautonomia symptoms, the small fiber neuropathy, like he's like, those are probably all linked. And I had been told I was hypermobile before, but then like other providers had said I wasn't because I didn't pass like the Vitan scale or whatever. I'm hypermobile in a bunch of spots that the scale doesn't test for. So, it was conflicting whether or not I was. And he said, oh, you're definitely hypermobile. He's like, you can't get out of this. You're hypermobile. Like, so that's part of your problem. And he said, the other part of your problem is I think you have a type of spondyloarthritis, which spondyloarthritis is basically the family of conditions that psoriatic arthritis is in. It also includes like ankylosing spondylitis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, reactive arthritis. So they're like they're like brother and sister diseases, whereas RA is like their cousin. So I'm going to have PSA is going to have more in common with ankylosing spondylitis than it would with RA, but they're still all very similar. So he said, I think you have the spondyloarthritis. I think it's psoriatic arthritis, but I'm not 100% sure yet. He's like, I want to give it some time before I give you like a label. Because he's like, it also could be ankylosing spondylitis, even though I didn't largely have I didn't really have back pain. So, he, he started me on some meds and and he basically wanted to see how would I respond to the meds to kind of gauge what was going on. And then after a few months, he was comfortable putting the label of psoriatic arthritis on it. It didn't take me as long to get diagnosed as it would other people because my diagnosis journeys were kind of like wrapped up in one another. And like, kind of like along the way, I got the migraines, I got the neuralgia, like I picked up the Raynaud. I was like picking stuff up kind of as I went along. And now it's all kind of like, oh, well, these things are like comorbid. So that makes sense,
Yeah. Wow. What an odyssey. You're like a chronic illness tumbleweed.
I know.
Rolling down a hill, just picking up illness after illness. And there's so much in that diagnostic odyssey that you experienced that is like really important, and so many things that can be gleaned from that. The dangers of having the wrong information on your chart and the way that can follow you, the dangers of having a specialist not take you seriously and not run the proper tests, but also the amazing wonder of having a doctor who really does care and who's willing to shoulder the burden of something that should be another doctor's responsibility that they're not actually doing. And, I know small fiber neuropathy, since I have it, is something that is usually caused by something else. And for me, we believe it's caused by mast cell activation. And for you, it sounds like very likely caused by psoriatic arthritis. And yeah, I mean, you're shaking your head yes for those who are listening. And it's so interesting that disease sort of presented first. The nerve damage from the psoriatic arthritis seems to have shown up before the symptoms from the psoriatic arthritis became, so loud that they could not be denied any longer. But yeah, I mean, and also the dangers of the fact that sometimes simple blood tests aren't enough. And the same is true for me. My MCAS is a clinical diagnosis. It is, we weren't able to capture evidence of it. But through treatment and, through a doctor's expertise, we were able to pinpoint that as the diagnosis, which brings me back to something that we've touched on earlier. What are the medications you were on for psoriatic arthritis, and how did it change your situation to get that diagnosis and to get on medication?
Right. So there are, like PSA, like we talked about, like a lot of times you can't diagnose it based on blood work because for most of us, your blood work's going to be normal most of the time. So, what we kind of did at first was he tried me on a few medications to kind of see what my response would be. And so it's very similar to a lot of rheumatology diseases where you have to start with like the DMARDs, which is stuff like methotrexate or sulfasalazine. And then you kind of, if you fail those, which, I am very mindful of trying to like make it not a negative reflection on me. Like I did not fail the meds, they failed me. Yeah. So my husband gets on my case about that. He's like, you did not fail anything. didn't work for you and it's its problem. So I will say that if you need that little boost, please use it. But like, so I started with Celebrex, which is like an NSAID. The Celebrex, I didn't do well with Celebrex. I had like a rebound joint pain thing from it. I just didn't like it. So from there we went to sulfasalazine. Sulfasalazine I did about 3 months, and it was helpful for the stiffness, but it doesn't really treat the enthesitis very well. And that's like my primary presentation. Like I need that enthesitis treated. Otherwise we can't walk. So we did that for 3 months, and then I started doing really poorly. And, my doctor was like, all right, well, you burned through that. Let's pull that off. He put me on methotrexate for about a month. He didn't want to put me on it because he wanted me to jump to biologics, but he's like, insurance won't let you. You have to try. Pretty much you have to try methotrexate unless you're like pregnant or something that you can get out of having to try it. And so he tried me on that. I had more of a rare side effect with it, where it actually triggered my neuralgia to flare like all the time. Where it had previously only flared, like I'll have periods where it flares a lot and periods where it doesn't. It was flaring like all the time. Like I would take methotrexate, and like methotrexate was like once a week. I would take it, and then within 2 hours, my neuralgia was flaring really bad, and it would last until like the day before my next dose, and then it would kind of wear off. The meds would kind of wear off, it would wear off, and then I take the other one and it would like repeat. And so that was kind of, I guess it's a side effect, but it's a more rare, uncommon one. And when he heard that after the month, he was like, all right, we're not doing this. We're getting you off this. Then he tried to put me on Tremfya, which is there's a couple of different classes of biologics. It's a biologic. It's an IL-23, I think. The tagline for Tremfya is like emerge Tremfyit, like Tremfyit. And I was not Tremfyit. I made it. I only made it through like the 2 starter doses, and I was getting like rapidly getting worse. And so he was like, okay, well this one, he's like, at this point you should at least be having some relief. He's like, we're going to pull you off that. So then he put me on Enbrel. My sweet baby Enbrel. It worked for a few months. And it's funny because apparently Enbrel is one of the ones that it should be harder for you to develop antibodies to, because with biologics, your immune system, there is a risk if you're just on a biologic that your immune system will learn how to fight it and develop antibodies to it, and then it doesn't work. So I made it probably about 4 months before my body started developing antibodies and I started feeling bad. But because we had pulled me off Tremfya so early, my doctor really wanted me to give it the full 6 months. So we actually ended up giving it 8 months. I had shin pain, like such bad shin pain for like the last like 2 months that I was on it. It just like my bones just hurt. It was still giving me relief in some areas, but then other areas were like starting to get like extremely painful. And so he tested my antibodies to Enbrel, and I was like 4 times the amount of like where it starts detecting your antibodies. So I was like, yeah, no wonder I feel so bad. I have like 4 times the level that would qualify to get you taken off for antibodies.
Wow.
So we switched. So in April, we just switched me to Humira, and we're not really liking my progress on Humira either. Most people start feeling relief if it's working for them. They start feeling relief like within the first couple weeks. And I actually got worse. Like I got worse than I was with like all those antibodies to Enbrel, where basically the shot was like starting to not work at all. Like when I started on Humira, the first like month and a half, 2 months, I felt like way worse. I got like enthesitis in my Achilles, which I had never had previously, to the point where like I could not like stand up and walk around my house very easily for like the first like 2 to 3 weeks. So like I was like hobbling around the house, like trying to get to the kitchen, trying to get to the bathroom, like icing. I bought like these ice boots to like ice my ankles. I was in like severe pain. And so he was kind of like, my doctor was like, he's like, I'm kind of worried that you're not. He's like, this does happen to some people where they get worse and then it gets better. But he's like, but if you're in like that much pain, we can try to pull you off. But I was like, with biologics, there's not an endless supply of them, right? At some point, you kind of run through the gamut.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want to pull myself off this early if there's a chance it could work. So I told him, I was like, no, let's try. Like, yes, I am having like major setbacks even from where I was before, but I was like, let's just keep it a try. So now I've been on it, I just had like my 3.5-ish month checkup like last week. And we kind of agreed that we don't really, like, I'm not responding to it the way that we would hope, but I am still responding to it some. And with biologics, they really want you to try to give it like 6 months to like really see how it's going to work. Because for some people, you don't get the full benefits until 6 months and for some of them, I think it's up to a year. So I'm also conscious of the fact that he does not want me to take the IL-17s category, which is like drugs like Taltz or Cosentyx that people probably see commercials for, because I have a genetic like test, family history type of thing with stomach problems. And then like we have like a genetic markers for Crohn's in my family. And for those IL-17 meds, they're not really recommended for folks who have like some sort of risk for Crohn's because they can bring that about if you have it like dormant in you. So that kind of rules out a category that he's not comfortable with me trying because he doesn't want to give me Crohn's on top of everything else, which I appreciate. But so basically I'm, Enbrel and Humira are in the TNF category. So they're in the same kind of class biologics. So they kind of have similar mechanisms. But if you develop antibodies to one, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't try another one in the class because they're all slightly different. So I'm on Humira now. And our plan is that we're going to reassess it in November. And if it doesn't work, we're going to switch to infusions of a medication, I think called Simponi, which is also TNF medication. Because my doctor said that for folks who respond to TNF blockers, but they don't respond well enough, infusions tend to work better. I don't know exactly how this works chemically, but apparently like when you have an injection medication, you're really only getting about 80% of the meds versus an infusion where you're getting like 100% of the meds.
Wow,
and I think I had never heard that before, but I guess that's something to do with them trying to make the meds fit in those tiny auto injectors and then like user error of stuff like spilling or whatever. I did have an injection malfunction a few weeks ago, and that was like, I lost the majority of the meds and they would not let me redo it. Like I couldn't do another one. I had to wait another 2 weeks until I was like scheduled. So it's been kind of, so it's been up and down. PSA is very hard to treat because we don't all respond to the meds the same. And some people are trickier than others. I think I'm a little tricky because this is like my 6th medication. And like, I have not really I've gotten better here and there, but like, I still can't, like, I can't walk a mile. Like I haven't, like most of last year, like I could not walk, and mostly still now, like I have a lot of days where like, I'm constantly doing like chronic illness math where I know how much juice my ankles have before I can no longer walk. Like I kind of have a good read on that right now. So it's like, I know that I can go to this grocery store because it's smaller and it only takes 800 steps for me to get from my car to the thing. Like I have like a very keen idea of how many steps like it takes to get places and like what I can do and what I can't do. Cause like I could like going to Target is pretty difficult because the parking lots are huge. The store is huge. So like if I need something from Target, we're doing like a pickup, like a car pickup, versus I might be able to go to like, the library down my street, and I know that I can park right in the front, and I know I'm just going in to get a hold at the desk, like a library hold, and that's about 800 steps. I can do that. Like you also have to think too, is like you don't really think. Because my ankles and my feet are so impacted, like driving puts pressure on those things too. So like your Achilles, your anterior tendons, your posterior tendons, you're using those when you drive.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, well, I not only have to consider how much walking I need to do when I get there, but do I have the juice to drive there and drive back? How long is it going to take? What's the traffic going to
Yeah.
take? Like,
Yeah. I'm
and
very
that's
familiar
when,
with these types of calculations.
yeah. So like, it's so, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, I've been like kind of frustrated with like my response to the medications because I'm just kind of like, I know it's worse without them, but I'm like, I know I find that I'm kind of frustrated and upset a lot of the time that I'm not getting more out of them. And I feel like I should be why am I not responding to these the way that I should be, or the way that I see other folks with PSA? Like, I know folks with PSA, like in kind of like my networks and my circles, and they can run.
Yeah.
And I can't even walk a mile. Like, I can't even, like, I can take my dog around our block, which is 0.2 of a mile most of the time, unless my Achilles really hurt. Like, I can like hobble along if it's the other tendons, but if the Achilles, you're really not going anywhere. That's like propelling you. So like most of the time I can do that. Like, I know I can do that, but then it's like I see people and they're like running and they're walking, and like as someone who's a runner, like me, not and like I had a lot of active hobbies. I can do hardly any of them. Like, I can't do Pilates anymore because I was doing reformer Pilates. It puts too much strain on my shins and my ankles. And like, I tried to go back after I had COVID, like a month after I had COVID, I tried to go to a class, and it put me in like a flare for like 4 days of my legs. And like, I couldn't like stand on my legs very easily. So I was like, okay, well, I can't do that right now. So then, I couldn't go back to my strength training class because I can't lift the amount of weights. Like, I can't lift the barbell anymore, and I can't do like, so I found that like what was hard for me, especially, is I felt like I was continuously losing things, right? Like, I was losing all my hobbies. I was losing all my activities. I'm an introvert, and most of my friends don't live in town anymore. Like, friends from college, like, live out of state. So that's kind of how I was meeting my social activities. Like, I was going to Pilates, I was going to my strength training class, and I was starting to kind of make like friends and acquaintances through that. And then it just kind of came to like a screeching halt when I could no longer participate. And like, those are activities where like, my strength training class was like runners. And in the running world, if you're not running, you're not part of the group anymore, right? So it's not like in a mean way, but like, you were only really doing things together because you were maybe training for a race together or doing stuff like that. And so like, I can't do any of that anymore. So I found that it's been really hard to try to pivot to other activities because, I had identified those as the activities and the hobbies that I liked. Like, I don't play any instruments. I don't do, I'm not a huge artist or anything. Like, so now I've been, really hyper fixating on like one of my only remaining hobbies, which is I read, and I'm like a very fast reader. Like, I'm like an excessively fast reader. So I've been like trying to slow myself down so that I don't run out of books. But like, and trying to do like maybe book clubs, and then kind of also pivoting into like, I'm in like an alumni group for my color guard group that I was in college. And I'm a volunteer facilitator for the Arthritis Foundation for the Psoriatic Arthritis Connect group, which is basically like a virtual, it's like basically like a virtual support group. And like, but we have like meetings like every other month, and we get on Zoom, and we, so like, and I'm one of the facilitators that kind of helps lead that group. And like, I got into that, largely because I didn't really know anyone else in my real life with psoriatic arthritis. No one in my family has it. Like, it's kind of, I'm kind of like one of the only people in my family with like all this autoimmune stuff. Like, I joke that I got all the illnesses for like the whole family. So like, I didn't really have anyone that really kind of understood what I was going through. And and I was feeling like, I need support, and where can I get support? Like, how can I find support somehow? And like, and I'm also like, I spent like all last year having it kick my butt, right? Like, it was just like every day was like a new disappointment. And, that's, and that's, I think a lot of people with any illness, like, they will know what that feels like, where you just feel like you're never gaining anything, you're only losing. And I was like, I have to turn this around somehow. Like, I'm doing everything I can possibly do. I'm eating well. I'm trying to exercise as much as my body will let me. I'm in the physical therapy still. I'm taking my meds. I'm in touch with my doctors. Like, I'm doing everything to promote a conducive environment for my evil immune system who's trying to like take me out. But like, I need something in my life where I feel like that's like just a source of positivity. Right. So I got an ad on Facebook for the Arthritis Foundation, and I went digging through it, and I was like, oh, they have a psoriatic arthritis group. I was like, I'm going to join that. And then so I joined it. And then I also, like, I don't know if you guys have Reddit. You guys use Reddit, but the psoriatic arthritis group on Reddit is awesome. Like, those people, it was like the first time, listening to symptoms or whatever, that I like really felt like somebody else was going through the same thing as me. Because, when I was trained to get diagnosed, I actually thought I was going to have mixed connective tissue disease.
Yeah.
Because my therapist and I joke about this now, because she thought I was going to have RA. And I was like, well, it's kind of RA, but then there's the tendon problem. There's the tendon issue. So we were like we were doctor Googling, trying to figure out what it was. And that was her guess. And my guess was MCTD. And then when I finally got the psoriatic arthritis diagnosed, which I had never really heard of that other than like Phil Mickelson commercials for like whatever meds he's on TV, like that pro golfer. Like, I had never really heard of it. So I didn't, other than that, and I didn't really have a frame of reference for what it was. But then when I got the diagnosis and then or the early diagnosis of this is what I think you have, I started like looking on Reddit and then Googling and researching and reading all the medication articles. I was like, I've never felt so seen in my entire life. And I finally had a name. Like, I knew what enthesitis was finally, because like I never had a name for that. I didn't know how to diagnose it. But it had also, it feels like a burning pain. So a lot of the time it was getting fobbed off as just being part of my neuropathy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no. So like, so when I got, kind of found that community on Reddit, and then I got, but then I was like, but I don't know these people in real life. I don't really get to talk to them in the same way. Like, I need to find something for myself that's like positive, but it's positive in a way where it's not like toxic positive, because like if you're going to try to join any other type of like local group or community group, like you're going to have to go through the whole explanation of like, okay, well, I'm like physically limited in these areas, so I can only help doing this. But then also like, I'm on immunosuppressants. So like, there are certain things I don't want to do because I don't really want to get sick, because it's a whole ordeal, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
So when I found the Arthritis Foundation group, I kind of like got involved in that, and that has actually been like a huge source of support for me, like just being able to talk to all those other people, like. And we've got like a good group of us. We're like, our group is kind of taken off. So we've got like a group of folks who are coming like every time we meet or coming back. So we're kind of getting to know each other better and getting to know each other's experiences. But then we also can like spitball ideas like, hey, have you tried a compression sleeve for this? Or have you iced this? Or what ways are you managing your costochondritis other than the meds? Like, so it's been very helpful for me. And it also gives me like, not purpose, but like, I'm trying to make something good out of this thing that's bad. Like, if I can help one other person who's newly diagnosed and like help them fast track, maybe know what to ask their doctor, or like maybe they will learn something from how I responded to something. And so I was like, if I can help one person, who was me like a year ago, 2 years ago, then like I will do it, because I also know a lot of people who have psoriasis who were not told the risk that they would develop psoriatic arthritis.
Wow.
And like, I have a friend from college who reached out to me at one point, was like, she's like, so I've been snooping on you in your journey because I have psoriasis, and I've like been waiting to see if I will develop it one day. So I'm like watching you to see like, how did it happen for you? And I was like, well, it's different because you had psoriasis your whole life. So like, but I was like, if you start having joint pain, immediately go see the rheumatologist. Like,
Yeah, totally.
like totally.
Well, I know there's so much more we could talk about. We haven't even gotten into the fact that you're being examined for trigeminal neuralgia. It's impossible to go through someone's entire journey in one episode, but we've covered a ton. A lot of really helpful stuff for someone else going through something similar. And what you're talking about needing to connect with someone else who has your disease and how powerful that can be. You being here today, telling your story, I'm sure is giving that to at least one person, who can find this and recognize that there's someone else out there going through something similar. And that's so powerful. But please keep in touch. I want to know what's going on with this trigeminal neuralgia thing. Once you figure that out, let me know. I do bring people back to do updates every once in a while on the podcast. So, please keep me updated. But I have one more question I have to ask you before we wrap up today. Yeah. So thinking about this time in your life, this diagnostic odyssey that you went on when you were being ignored. And on top of that, you felt like you had to be everyone's big sister and you had to push through, and you're trying so hard to get your body to do what you want it to do. You're trying so hard to listen to these doctors who are giving you the wrong information, telling you that you need to do, all of this physical therapy. You're doing 3 hours of physical therapy a day, and you're being so hard on yourself. And I know that you can look back on that and know that there was some wrong information that led you to that. If you could talk to yourself in that moment when you're pushing yourself too hard, what is the message you'd want to share with yourself?
I think the biggest thing I would tell myself would be like, it's okay to slow down, and it's okay to like drop one of the things you're doing. Like, I probably could have dropped one of the types of physical therapy or whatever. And I think, but I was so committed to trying to fix it when they were telling me that it was me that needed to fix it. So I think I would give myself a hug and be like, first of all, you need a hug. And then second of all, like, there is something wrong. You need to go back to rheumatology earlier. Like I would have probably kicked myself to rheumatology earlier. And like, I'm just trying to not let myself get like super overwhelmed, and, just like, you're doing the best you can. You have to take it day by day. Like I wouldn't want myself to know so much of what was going to happen, because that would probably like freak me out. But like, I think at the time when I got through a lot of the neuropathy, I thought that was going to be the end. And so I really let myself just like kind of feel like I had achieved something. Like we've not really overcome it, but we've overcome it enough. And so then it was almost devastating when the other stuff started rolling in, and you're like, I thought I was done with this saga. And so I think I would just really try to be like nice to myself and give myself a hug, because I'm like, it's okay. You got like a long road, but it's going to be okay. Like we're going to, like the horrors persist, but so do you. Like you're going to get through it. Like I saw that on a meme one time, and I was like, that's really appropriate. Like, yeah, the things are still going to happen, and they're going to suck, but you're still here, right? And you're still plugging away every day and doing the best you can.
Yeah. Wow. That's an amazing, amazing perspective. And I really appreciate you sharing your story with us today. Please tell us where our listeners can go if they want to connect with you online, or anything else you want to plug.
So you can find me on Instagram if you want. I'm not super public there, but I do occasionally share arthritis stuff. I'm at lowercase a _ SCHIRO on Instagram. But I also will plug, if you have arthritis of any type or any type of rheumatological stuff, I'm going to plug like finding a support group. Like Arthritis Foundation has one for PSA. They've got ones for RA. They've got ones for gout. They've even got ones for like EDS folks. So if you're looking for a support network, like I would really recommend looking at their Connect groups. They have ones that are in person, and then they have national groups like mine, which is virtual. And they also have one for chronic pain, which no matter what your diagnosis is, like that's also, I think that's a relevant topic for a lot of us. So, if you're looking for some type of support, that's somewhere you can look. There's also like the National Psoriasis Foundation. There's Creaky Joints, which I think is international. There's Versus Arthritis, which I think is in the UK. Like, there are support networks and resources out there we just don't know about. You don't know about them until you go digging. So I would definitely encourage people, like, whatever your condition is, like, there's going to be an organization out there, you know, that you could probably get support or resources from. So I really encourage you to, like, not just sit in your house and feel like it's just you. Like, you can get online. Like, I know a lot of people feel chronically online, but, like, get on there and do some Googling, because I promise you there is some group out there, you know, for
Awesome.
you.
Well, I'm really hoping that you find the medication, or that you're already on the medication that's going to provide you some relief. That process is so difficult, trying new medications and having to be on it for months at a time until you even know if it's working or not. But I really appreciate you sharing the journey that you've been on so far. Please stay in touch. Let me know how it goes in the future. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us today.
Thank you all so much for having me. This has been it's been really nice to get to chat, and because I've been listening to the podcast for a good while now. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's been really nice to come on. So I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Major Pain. I'm Jesse Mercury, your host and the producer of this podcast. Artwork by Egg Salad Salad. Our theme music is the song Time Machine from my synth-pop album Sci-Fi, now streaming everywhere. Support this show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast. If you have questions or comments you'd like to share with myself, our guests, or our listeners, send an email to majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about this show, support its creation, or comment on any episode at majorpainpodcast.com. Major Pain is supported by our listeners on Patreon. Thank you to our $2 per month supporters, our $7 per month patrons Naomi Adele Smith, Sonny Roberts, Kelsey Matson, Alexandria Henderson, Justin Minnick, Laura Stevens, Heather Muncie, and Robert, and our $25 per month producers Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Learn how you can support this podcast while receiving special recognition on the show, gifts, and monthly bonus episodes at patreon.com/majorpainpodcasts.